The following is a CUNY TV special presentation.
As we recover from Sandy, our thoughts obviously go out to those who've experienced flooding. The damage, has been overwhelming. The enormity of this disaster, as I said, is just beyond comprehension. But as we always do, and particularly here at ABNY, and as New Yorkers, we rise to the occasion to help others and to help our city. That's what we do, and we will do it again. We have an incredible panel with us this morning. Obviously, infrastructure will be a main focus for us as we replan our city and reimagine, as I mentioned. So without further ado, I'm pleased to introduce our great friend Mitchell Moss, who will moderate today's panel. Mitchell.
In any event, let me start by asking Erica a key question. I want to ask you, last night 73% of the Latino vote went for President Obama. What do we know about the election yesterday? What does it mean for New York? What does it mean for the nation?
Well, other than the fact that Republicans blew it yesterday, and probably for 2016 with Latinos, it's interesting because the way it gets covered is like this new Latino phenomenon. Like, the voters came out and there's this presence, et cetera. And this is a story we've been covering for quite some time. And not to toot our horn in terms of El Diario turning 100 years next year, but it's been a buildup for a long time. And I think it's really a statement not just about Latino voter turnout, but basically that we've been a part of the fabric of this country, of the city for quite some time. So the impact is pretty evident nationally, and then it's interesting because you get to New York City where there are 2.3 million Hispanics, where 1 out of 4 New Yorkers is Hispanic, but sometimes in our institutions and different sectors you would never know that. So I think it's going to be interesting in terms of the mayoral race, in terms of whether a citywide a Hispanic candidate launches a candidacy, a bid for citywide office, how Hispanics are activated. We saw a sample of that uptown in the race for a congressional seat between Adriano Espaillat and Congressman Rangel. And it's really going to be interesting in how the candidates for mayor basically try to present an agenda to Hispanics, what they think that agenda is, who they have on their teams, and how they're trying to woo voters for that race.
Well, thank you. I want to go to our resident Republican, Tom. Why don't without giving an epitaph, what can we learn from last night's election?
Well, that we'll have 7 old white guys in a corner at some point, and that will be the extent of who we are. I mean, George Pataki back in 1998 did a substantial outreach with Hispanic voters in the state. Took the time, quite honestly, to learn the language, to communicate. My party is just tone deaf. You saw it over the last 2 cycles. We have literally thrown out 5 United States Senate races, not 5 local races, but 5 United States Senate races by nominating people that just, when my boys cringe when God and religion, et cetera, come up during the course of these political debates, that God's will is doing X, Y, and Z, our party is in deep trouble. And I think that there were a number of people last night who, at the national level, who recognized it and said, we need to refigure out who we are, because Hispanic voters are certainly, listen, we have a United States Senator, we have a governor of New Mexico, and that would be my ticket in 2016. If we don't change the optics of who we are and what we stand for and say to Latin voters, to African Americans, quite frankly, that we're an option, then we'll be extinct, and that's the future.
Wow. Let's get an upbeat view from Congressman-Elect. We should congratulate him on his victory. It was a tough primary, but now he's general.
Well, thank you, and I'm certainly, feel privileged to have the honor to go down to Washington at such a significant time for our country, and was pleased with the outcome nationally, at least as it related to the re-election of the president and the holding of the majority in the Senate. I do think that it's interesting. I believe we spent a total of about $6 billion this year from an electoral standpoint, only to arrive in the same place that we were at in January of 2011. I think that's something for us to reflect upon as it relates to how we finance elections moving forward. There's some serious issues that everyone down in Washington will have to confront, both in the short term as it relates to the fiscal cliff that will be challenging for a lot of folks, particularly given that it has to be addressed in the lame duck session. For me, in particular, things changed a whole lot on October 29th when Superstorm Sandy came through, devastated many neighborhoods, as we know, across the Northeast. But in the congressional district that I'll now represent, significant neighborhoods were hit extremely hard, whether that was Coney Island or Seagate, Manhattan Beach, Hamilton Beach, Mill Basin, Canarsie. These are all neighborhoods that will now be part of the 8th Congressional District. And it's interesting because I'll be absorbing parts of 4 different congressional districts, all of which were hit hard. Jerry Nadler currently represents Coney Island and Seagate. I'll be representing that. Bob Turner now represents Manhattan Beach, Mill Island, Mill Basin. I'll be representing that. Ed Towns, whose seat I am acceding to, represents Canarsie. I'll be representing that. And then, of course, Gregory Meeks has Hamilton Beach, which is a part of Howard Beach that was also hit extremely hard. And so there's this short-term issue that we all have to deal with, humanitarian relief, making sure that people have food, medicine, shelter, and water. I think that we've made progress in that area, but there's still a lot of people who are suffering. The second step is going to have to be how do we repair or give people the resources to make sure that they can turn their lives around and restore themselves to their previous position as best we can through a combination of making sure that private insurance does the right thing, that FEMA resources come in, and that we allocate the $100 million that Governor Cuomo has indicated will be available in an efficient fashion. And then lastly, I think we all are going to have to grapple with the long-term structural questions as to how to make sure if we rebuild and if a significant number of people are going to live on the coast, which I believe we should rebuild, but there has to be a real analysis, comprehensive evaluation done as to what type of levee system or seawalls or bulkheads are going to be necessary in order to prevent this type of catastrophic damage from occurring again the next time Mother Nature strikes.
Well, first of all, we have to make sure you're appointed to the House Transportation Infrastructure Committee because that's where the money will be. And we might as well have a smart guy there to give Jerry Nadler a little extra bulk. Now, let me go to Jennifer. Can I ask you, when you talk about the election, what it means for New York, not much attention was paid to New York except as sort of a campaign source until the hurricane came. And what can we expect out of Washington in this new next 4 years?
Well, I think in New York, I think the good news for the Democratic team was that we actually started to reverse some of what happened in the last election cycle. Obviously, while the Republicans will still control the House from New York, we're going to have 2 new members of the delegation. Dan Maffei from upstate Syracuse is going to be returning, and Sean Patrick Maloney beat Nan Hayworth. That's obviously going to help with New York's clout.
And you had a role in that, is that right?
Yeah, we did the TV for Sean Patrick Maloney. So, again, but I think part of what's going to happen here, and I think it played out in the election across the country, frankly, is it was not just a rejection of the extremism on the social issues that we saw. I think that we had a referendum about the role of government, and I certainly think as a fierce Democrat, I believe strongly that government has a role to play in so many ways. And I think the Republicans who tried to run, especially picking Paul Ryan as part of the ticket, the Ryan budget would have cut funding to FEMA, for example. And I think here in New York State, it was profoundly important to see the important role that government is going to play here. I remain hopeful that Washington's going to continue to recognize that, not just in the short term, but going forward. I think we all remember the promises of 9/11 that fell short in terms of actually coming to fruition. But I think this is going to be one of those pivotal moments, not just in New York and New Jersey, but nationally, where we actually get to see government as a force for good and know that we need to look to it and rely upon it to help us address some of the crises that we're facing.
Jeff.
Shecky.
Wait, he also was responsible for Senator Gillibrand's. We have to give him credit for that. When he's been with her since the beginning.
Thank you. Question?
Well, tell us, is there anything that New York can benefit from what happened last night?
Well, look, I think there's a lot of things. I had the good fortune, as Jennifer, the two of us were able to do Sean Patrick Maloney's campaign together, which is great. Also, to see Dan Maffei back in office, I think is going to be great. There's an interesting thing about what happened in New York last night. New York went monstrously Democratic last night. I think up and down the line, there was sort of a big Democratic wave, and New York was a piece of that. And in fact, if redistricting had been a little differently, I think we would have picked up even more seats on the congressional side for sure. You saw that in a couple of the blue states. I mean, in Illinois, for example, was the same way. Last night, Democrats just romped in Illinois across the board, and because the Democrats controlled redistricting, picked up an inordinate number of congressional seats. So I think that in-state, there's no question last night was a huge night for Barack Obama. I mean, so many people had sort of doubted the notion of his coalition, and the coalition largely stayed together. And I think what Erica said about Hispanic voters is such a critical point that and Tom said it very bluntly, you know, there is no path to a true majority with the way, in terms of the current Republican Party, given their positions on some things that are anathemas to Latinos. Chris Cillizza in the Washington Post this morning makes the case very clearly, and has before, which is, don't laugh. Texas, come 2020, is a Democratic state the way the Hispanic voters are moving towards the Democratic Party, right? So if there's not a fundamental change in terms of the way the Republican Party deals with Latinos, even a state like Texas, which we would laugh at today, should vote Democratic by 2020, and that's an amazing statement.
So Tom, tell us about the Republicans in the state Senate. A lot of people are wondering, do you have any insights? Will they be able to maintain their one pocket of power, or will they be vestigial?
Well, you have to think that the independent coalition with Senator Klein and you know, the determination going forward is who he gets to deal with. But clearly, he and Diane Savino, two city Democrats in the state Senate, have a lot of power this morning. Because it does look like they'll be the, you know, the key factor in who they go forward with. And I got a sense that everything I've heard, and I guess Jennifer and Jeff would know a lot better than me, but you know, my sense is that they'll work with the Republican caucus in some way, shape, or form, whether that means they drag the Republican votes and make Jeff or Diane the majority leader, or they work and make a Tom Libous the majority leader. I don't know how that'll all work out, but I think that at least politically, it has worked out very well for the governor. I sense that he's had a very good first 2 years working under that arrangement. And going forward, I sense that that's what's going to happen.
Just as we're talking about Latinos and the Republicans having a fundamental problem, last night gay marriage passed in multiple states, passed by ballot for the first time in multiple states. And yes, there are more liberal states, but last time I looked, so are we. And the sort of conservative party obsession over things like gay marriage that could very well cause the Republicans to lose the state Senate seems myopic and insane to me if I was advising their side. Talk about things to get caught up in that are true silliness.
How will last night's results affect 2013 in terms of both issues and also the future of the mayoralty?
Well, I'm not quite sure how marriage equality is going to help fix New York, per se, given what we're looking at right now. But what I thought was most interesting, and a couple of the states were not expected to win, especially in Minnesota. But I think what it demonstrated is that, one, the electorate is getting younger, and demographically, marriage is just not a big issue for young people. I thought it was interesting nationally that actually young people, the millennials, turned out at a higher rate than they did in 2008. And for young people, it's just not an issue. So by nature of demographics, we're increasingly seeing a trend in gay marriage. But I think that the nice thing, too, was that there were a number of openly gay candidates, whether it was Sean Patrick Maloney or Tammy Baldwin. It just wasn't an issue. It was not discussed. It was no longer relevant. It just was not the focus of the campaign. And frankly, I think that means that it will not be an issue in next year's mayoral race, other than perhaps something that people think is long overdue. And frankly, I think that's long overdue. I think maybe seeing a woman like we saw, the great sweep in the U.S. Senate for women finally coming to pass, I think that is an interesting lesson for next year.
In
If I
New
can
Hampshire,
Yeah,
all-female congressional, first ever. New Hampshire, all-female congressional delegation ever.
the landscape has shifted so dramatically that not only was the losing streak broken in terms of states agreeing to the legality of gay marriage in Maine and Maryland, but one of the things that has not really been talked about is the fact that for the first time in the history of the republic, a sitting president came out and said that gay marriage should be lawful. And it was a non-issue from the moment that he made the declaration to the moment that he was elected last night. And that is of great consequence. And so I agree with everyone that from this moment forward, rational Republicans, one would think, would move away from that type of divisive social issue. And we have a very rational Republican sitting.
Well,
on the
one
panel
would
right
also
now.
assume they would not have elected to talk about women's reproductive freedom and the definition of rape in the middle of things. So I think the party has a whole lot of problems going on for them. I think I would certainly agree with Tom on that.
You know, I don't think that, I looked real quick, and Jeff read the Washington Post. You could tell that he was up very early this morning coming in. I don't think that there is a Republican House or Senate member in all of New England as
That's
of this
correct.
morning.
No Republican in the
No
Northeast.
Republican in the Northeast.
None.
Which is incredible.
There will be no Republican member in
Yeah.
in all of Congress in the Northeast.
Northeast.
I think there's going to be a very important sort of debate
In Congress.
Start in Connecticut.
In the House.
Connecticut up. Connecticut, not New York. Connecticut up. New England, sorry.
Yeah, we're not New England, in New England.
Very, very important debate, I think, in the House and in the Congress and in the country next year as to what are the legitimate functions of government. I think last night, those that argued that there are legitimate functions for government across a wide variety of different areas, certainly in terms of balance and compassion and supporting people who need assistance, that was an argument that was won out. And it seems that there are some in the House of Representatives who've come to the conclusion that there's nothing that government can do that is legitimate. And Ronald Reagan made a statement, I believe in 1964, when he was speaking on behalf of then presidential candidate Barry Goldwater, and says, government outside of its legitimate functions does nothing better than the private sector. And I've always found that to be a fascinating statement, because I think what President Reagan was saying, and I would agree, that the private sector has been a tremendous vehicle for growth and innovation and prosperity. No one should disagree that a market-based economy has been critical to our success as a country, but I think what President, then Governor, I believe, Reagan was conceding is that there are legitimate functions of government.
El Diario La Prensa endorsed President Obama, unlike some of the tabloids in New York City.
Yes, unlike the Daily News and New York Post.
And so help us, and since we've heard about the importance of the Latino vote, what would your readers want most from the president, given their turnout and support? Is it immigration? Is it small business? Where do you see this as the area that you can effectively make a case?
Obviously, immigration reform and, the implications of that would be, huge for New York and nationally. I mean, the Partnership for a New Economy, the Mayor Bloomberg's coalition, has projected all the sort of revenue that immigrants could bring to the city and the nation. So that's really top priority, because if it doesn't happen with this next term, then the Democrats could be setting themselves up for failure or absenteeism at the polls. So obviously that's the expectation, that there will be a path towards legalization. And locally, I think two critical areas are education and small business growth. I mean, Latinos know how to get businesses off the ground, and I think that the Center for an Urban Future had put out a report, that's why I'm giving you guys a shout out, put out a report a few years back about how there really needed to be some kind of holistic, robust, strategic strategy citywide to really help small businesses that are started by immigrants get from small level to mid-level. And obviously education. We can't have a pocket of schools that do well for some communities or for some people who manage to get into them. Education really has to be quality across the board, and it's really critical considering the face of the city, the face of this nation, and the aging baby boomers, and how we need to have, an available labor workforce that can become new consumers, taxpayers, and purchase homes that become available.
I want to get some comments, and we'll get questions while we have time.
Well, I do think it's unfair to some extent, Erica, for the president, because the president could do all that he wants on immigration reform, for example, and already did. I mean, not immigration reform per se, but I mean, did some amazing things by executive order, which is the only way he was going to get stuff passed. Until the Republicans wake up, they still control the House, so nothing's going to happen. And the amazing thing that has already started this morning and will continue is the battle from the Tea Party caucus about how one of the reasons that they lost is that they weren't conservative enough, which is insanity. And yeah, as Mitchell said, I had the great fortune of working for Joe Donnelly, who's a wonderful centrist Democrat in Indiana, who went up against one of these Tea Party guys who took out one of the great senators of our time, Dick Lugar. And that kind of, again, to use the word myopic view of how things should be, taking out Dick Lugar, putting in a guy who clearly was not qualified, not right, and really not right about so many things. I'm so glad that campaign happened, because if Richard Murdoch weren't allowed to speak, we might not know his true views. And the notion of these guys, I mean, Todd Akin and Murdoch, I mean, thank God these guys are not in the United States Senate. But on the House side, poor Hakeem's about to go to the House and start to try to talk to folks about the role of government, and they think that the solution is that government should be much smaller and that FEMA isn't necessary. That's what we're dealing with. And one final thing. If you look at the numbers, and I know a lot of the folks last night on the TV networks were saying this, clearly a big win for Obama, a huge electoral vote win. By the time we get Florida in our corner today, which it should happen, it will be a massive electoral vote victory. It will be a big popular vote victory. And yet, if you look at the map of the country and the counties, it's a lot of red. And the truth is that the cities are the things that are blowing things up. So we are still extraordinarily divided, and much of the counties of this country went Republican. And so that pull between the House of Representatives and the Senate is going to continue, because frankly, that's where America is.
I'm going to try to take some questions now.
Hi, Mitchell. I'm Dawn Barber. I co-founded New York Tech Meetup. I actually wanted to hear really from all of the panelists what you feel the role of technology will play in government moving forward.
Well, the trend among Hispanics, for example, is that we're big, especially younger generation. Well, up until age 35, we're big on social media and mobile. With our campaign coverage, and I mean, El Diario is owned by Impromedia, so we have sister papers in Los Angeles, Chicago, Orlando, and other parts of the country. So we found that people were very responsive on mobile with our digital coverage, et cetera. So it's common sense. People working long hours, the mobile becomes more critical for a workforce that's probably out in the field for longer days. So I would say it's continuing that trend, and really, mobile and social media are going to be critical to getting information out.
Tom?
On a more global point, and I don't know if this is part of the question, but I think Bill Cunningham this morning said to me that, we came very close in Sandy to losing the entire communication system in New York City that if the water levels had risen a little bit greater. And so I think that this storm is an opportunity, as Congressman-Elect pointed out, is that, we really have to do some real planning and look at things, because we'll have not done right by the city if we don't look at things like our communication system, our seawalls, our infrastructure, et cetera, to make sure it doesn't happen again. Because if we turn around in 5 or 10 years, whenever the next storm hits, which I'm sure it will at some point, now is the time to invest to make sure that the city's safe going forward. And that, from a technology standpoint, is, we have to put those resources together as a city.
One of the things I'd also add is that from an economic development standpoint, I think it's going to be important for public policymakers working in partnership with the private sector to help continue to facilitate the growth and development of technology and innovation and that industry here in New York City. In the congressional district that I'll be representing, we've got the Brooklyn Tech Triangle, part of the F-train corridor, 11 colleges and universities. One of the lessons that many of us in the legislature learned in the aftermath of the collapse of the economy in 2008 is that while we have to continue to support the financial services sector, insurance, and real estate, those are bedrock foundations for New York City's economy, that we have to diversify and grow. Technology and innovation is one of those clear sectors where we've got a lot of strategic advantages. We've got young people with a lot of creative talents. We've got wonderful mass transportation. We obviously have to build upon that. But I think that's a growth opportunity as it relates to economic development for us that we've all got to hone in on moving forward.
Apart from the rest of the nation and the results, and maybe you and Jennifer could address this, does the hurricane change the agenda for the city over the next year in the state in terms of where we invest our funds, what becomes an issue? Are we going to be slowing some projects? Is infrastructure going to take the center stage? How does having this hurricane kind of alter the dynamics of New York?
Well, let's start with yesterday, and it's been reported so widely, and any number of you who, I'm sure all of whom voted and waited in lines and lines and lines, I cannot believe we are living in a third world country where we can't get election day right in New York. And I'm not talking about in the Rockaways where God knows it should have been chaotic. That makes sense. But the lines on the Upper West Side, and trust me, you hear Bubby complaining after being in line for an hour, it is not pleasant, right? You do not want to hear that. So it's just crazy that we can't, from a technology perspective, if you wouldn't mind, fix some of the things with elections. And actually, I hope we modernize some of the stuff the way other states have done, whether it's vote by mail or any number of the modern technologies we can use to improve things. As it relates, Mitchell, to your question, I think there's no doubt that Sandy changes some of our priorities. I think that you've already sort of seen inklings from this out of Albany as to what people are going to be thinking about and talking about. And we have got to rebuild and build our infrastructure. It's been a serious need in New York and nationally for a long period of time, and an ignored need. And it can't be ignored. I mean, the hurricane just sticks it in our face and says we have to do something about creating an infrastructure projects, public-private partnerships that work to create and build and create jobs and do all the good things they can do by accessing private capital along with public capital to do good things for New York State. So, to some extent, I hope that we can go back to Robert Moses in a kinder, gentler way and build New York.
Mitchell and panelists, it was obviously a very stimulating conversation. We thank all of you and Mitchell for organizing this. Thank you all for coming. Thank you for the panelists, and we'll see you all next week. And go out and support and help people who really need it. Thank you.